So I downloaded this app called FeeId that you guys may or may not have heard of. So this app lately, over the last few months, I've been hearing a lot about it. It's built up quite a bit of hype. It's kind of like Grindr for straight people, or I shouldn't just say straight people, but people who aren't specifically just gay. Like I have straight friends who've been using it for casual sort of hookups. And it's funny because in the straight world, I found that people also use Tinder that way. I don't know if you guys agree with this, if you have the same experience, but in my observation, Tinder, Bumble, etc., those kinds of apps in the gay world are actually used more so for dating and making friends, because we in the gay world have the apps like Grindr and Scruff that are specifically oriented towards hookup culture, I guess. But I find that in the straight world, they do use Tinder for very casual hookups. But despite that there's no specifically hookup app. So FeeId has become that, and FeeId has also become this app that I've heard from people I know, that they use it for more sort of niche hookup situations like threesomes and, things that you can't or maybe don't feel comfortable easily advertising on Tinder, let's say, or your Hinge profile, right? So I downloaded it out of curiosity to see what kind of guys are there, and just like Grindr, I think the fantasy doesn't really match up with the reality, I thought I was gonna encounter curious, bi-curious guys who maybe are different from the crowd that I find on apps like Grindr or Scruff, or that I meet at bars. So I was excited for the prospects, but in the end, it's the same kind of bullshit. I only matched with one guy who was 100 miles away, and I will say he was quite sexy. But upon talking to this guy, I realized that we weren't even compatible because he fucking wrote in his profile what he was looking for. He wrote it the wrong way. I will say it's also confusing because on the app, it just says in your profile desires. So you could interpret that the wrong way, right? You could write what you're seeking, what you would want the other person to, how they would compliment you in a sexual dynamic. Or you could interpret that as oh, this is what I desire to be in that dynamic. I don't know if that's making sense, but it's not as simple as Grindr, where it'll say top or bottom. So he ended up writing it in a way that I misunderstood in his profile. And so in the end, it's I've been talking to this guy 100 miles away who we're not even compatible. And I'm well, what's the fucking point? But also what I noticed on the app, I mentioned the threesome thing, it seems most of the guys or most of the people on the app are looking for a group situation of at least 3 people, as opposed to a one-on-one thing. So, I mean, to each his own, but most of them, it's clear that they want a woman, at least one woman to be involved. And I'm no, I'm gay all the way. There's no confusion for me. I don't want a woman to be in the dynamic at all. So it's not really the right app for me. And it's just funny how, again, these apps, you always have a fantasy of how it might be. And then you're oh, this isn't even what I'm looking for. Have any of you guys used this app?